Welcome to Books and Buns, the show where we discuss a new book with its author over tea and cakes. I'm Kerry Dingle, WORLDwrite and WORLDwrite's director, and for today's show we're really lucky to have with us Ella Whelan, who is the author of What Women Want, Fun, Freedom and an End to Feminism. And I'll just show you the book, and I can tell you now, this is a seriously highly recommended read. So, we have with us today the most fantastic crew of women around the table to discuss Ella's ideas. First of all, we have Marisa Pereira. Hi. Marisa is the Assistant Director at WORLDwrite and WORLDwrite. We have Augusta Jerez, who is a student in the USA, but actually home is Nicaragua. Clara Goundry,
Hiya.
Who is an A-level student. Eleanor Smith-Hahn,
Hello.
Who is at university. We have Emily Dinsmore, who also works at Spite. On this side, we have Rachel Maiden,
Hi.
Who is at university. Hannah Byrne,
Hi.
Who works in the city in advertising. And we have Wendy Innocente,
Hello.
Who has recently graduated and is looking for work in the media. Brendan O'Neill, the editor at Spiked Online magazine, suggests that we live in an era in which he feels really privileged, that it's an era of women's liberation, and I concur with that. But what do our wonderful crew think? So let me come to you, Clara. You're young.
I think that I'm very lucky to live in a generation and a society that does put emphasis on equality in all aspects of life, and I do acknowledge that. But I do think there are still some issues that women face on a daily basis, and so I'm not so sure whether I am confident enough to say that feminism isn't needed anymore, but I do acknowledge that we have come very far as a society to have equal rights between genders.
Emily.
I think for day-to-day issues and kind of everyday life as a woman, no, there are no kind of major differences that makes life harder for women or life harder for men. I think we're pretty much there. I mean, in terms of things like schooling and university and even work life, women are actually kind of outperforming men. So we're doing better than ever before. I mean, there are some specific issues like abortion rights, which still aren't kind of fully where someone like me would want them to be, but we're kind of there completely when it comes to equality.
Ella.
Today, in relation to what our mothers or our grandmothers' experience of life was, it's remarkably different and much, much, much better. I mean, talking to my granny and my mother when I was writing the book, they do feel extremely privileged to have lived through an era which has changed so much. And I personally think it's fantastic, the situation women are in. I think we don't celebrate that enough of how good we have it. There's a tendency to be a bit kind of doom-laden when actually, if you kind of put it back to, say, even the 1950s, I mean, life then was much, much harder for women.
But if we don't have the drudgery and we don't have the outside toilets and we don't have the man in the iron bath in the front room or any of those kind of horrors, and we do have the right to vote and the equal chance to get a job, how does that contrast with what feminism says? Rachel, what do you think of these ideas of, fragile women that Ella describes in her book?
Well, I think it's very difficult to say what feminism today argues for, because feminism today actually encompasses a lot of different beliefs and a lot of different modes of activism. I think there's definitely some things within feminism I completely disagree with, and there's others that I completely agree with. But the one fundamental aim of feminism that remains is to dismantle patriarchy and correct for women-specific issues. So I think as long as women-specific issues still exist, there's still a need for feminism.
You tell us what's bad about feminism today, and maybe you can, respond to Rachel on this. Was there ever a good feminism?
It's interesting that you raised the fact that there's a lot of different definitions of feminism today. I think that's actually largely part of the problem. I think what I write in the book is that it has become a label rather than a political movement, even down to the fact that, I mean, I was in one of the high street stores in Oxford Street the other day, and they have kind of glittery bags with feminism on it and t-shirts that say I am a feminist on it. It's very much become a kind of fashion, I think, and a fashion can mean lots of different things to different people, but taking it on its political basis, I think ostensibly what feminism today seeks to do is to protect women. And what I mean by that is it seeks to make the argument that women are in need of protection from men, from society, from the kind of oppressions of the state, as they argue. You know, you brought up the word patriarchy. It's a word that I have a lot of problem with, because I don't think there ever actually was a patriarchy. I think that women did suffer oppression in the past, but that wasn't this kind of, I see patriarchy as this sort of free-floating idea that there was a kind of men rule the world, which never really was the case, and certainly isn't the case today. The main issue that I have with feminism today is it doesn't ask women what they want. I mean, that was why I wrote a book called What Women Want. It tells women that they need to be protected, and it tells women that, you know, this is going to traumatize you. You should feel bad about this. When someone says something to you on the street, this is going to be part of your identity as someone who is kind of oppressed. It's always kind of looking inwards. That's my main problem.
Well, that's interesting what you say, Ella. And you catalogue in your book the maddest, baddest, and what you call the saddest of feminist campaigns, and the idea that we're hurt, we're made second class by words. Hannah, what do you think?
I agree with the ideas in the book that words shouldn't be banned or censored, and that people should be able to express themselves and have freedom of speech. With regards to words hurting us, in the media, particularly websites like the Daily Mail, there is a constant stream of sexism, and the way women are referred to is often vastly different to how the men are represented. And I do think that this ends up having a negative effect on the way women are viewed in society. Whilst men are being uplifted by words, women are often being brought down. And whilst they might not hurt personally, I do think that it contributes to society as a whole in the way women are viewed. Remember that not everybody is outspoken, and whilst I might be able to walk down the road and handle somebody catcalling me, I know women who it's not in their nature to respond and defend themselves. So I think that while they don't hurt and they shouldn't be banned or censored, we do need to be mindful about the words we're using.
You know, do women face sexist remarks every time they walk out on the street? You know, how big a problem is that? Augusta, in America, in Nicaragua, is this an issue in your view?
Well, on a personal level, I do experience catcalls. I think we all do. So usually what I do is just, I ignore it. It's like, as if it's not with me. But there's always a question. Sometimes they do get aggressive, and they're like, oh, so you're too good, you don't want to answer. And I've had situations when it can get kind of scary. Luckily, I haven't had any situation where it has turned violent, but there is, I guess, the fear that something else might happen.
Ella, is there a relationship, do you think, between women being, you know, better off, having a much better life, and this obsession with trivia, with it, and I'm calling it trivia, with name calling, cat calling, wolf whistling?
Yeah, this is something that I'm extremely worried about and fascinated with. The more free we are, so women are, you know, it's factually the case that women are not oppressed in terms of under the law, or there is no structural inequality in relation to women. We are in a much better position than our ancestors, and yet today we have such a bigger panic about women's freedom. And you can see this just right down to a great example, terrible example in my opinion. At the moment there's discussion about criminalising misogyny. It's happening in Nottingham, it already has been happening, which means people being potentially locked up for catcalling or wolf whistling, and there's talks about this being rolled out across the UK or certainly in London. And really what we're having is a small group of contemporary feminists, and they tend to be media journalists and sort of prominent public figures, who are arguing that women are in such terrible danger all the time that we need to do something about it. And then you have the authorities, the police kind of wanting to, and politicians wanting to seem like they're doing something, until you have this absolutely insane situation in which we're giving credence to the idea that you would lock a man up for wolf whistling at a woman on the street. I mean, let's just get one thing straight. There is certainly no, real danger that women face every day on the street. It is just not the case that when we leave the house, we are in some kind of danger, under some kind of threat. At the same time that I think most of us will say that at some point in our life, maybe something would have happened. And by something, I mean, you might get a whistle, you might get a wink, something like that. The problem is, what feminism is doing today, I think, is pathologizing that and telling women to take that on as a trauma. And rather than what you said is just kind of ignore it, shrug your shoulders. That doesn't mean it's right, but it just is like, it brushes off me. I think what we're in danger now of saying is that we have to bring in laws to protect women from experiencing this, that women have to interpret these very, very mundane everyday experiences as, so detrimental to them that it would cause them harm. I mean, really challenge the idea that a wolf whistle would lead to violence. I think this whole idea that flirty, perhaps sometimes inappropriate, but hey, grey area behaviour is on a sliding scale right up to serious things like sexual violence is a very dangerous road to go down.
Emily, these calls on the state to ban things and censor things, what sort of consequences do these calls have?
I think they're at the detriment to everybody, actually, because interpersonal relations between men and women, if we start policing those, we start criminalising those, that's a very dangerous path that we're going down. I actually think, kind of following on from the cat calling, the wolf whistling thing, most men, I think, when they do that, if they do that, they're being a bit cocky, a bit ballsy, think they're having a laugh. The idea that they would think that they were seriously damaging a woman or causing her potential harm or harassment, I think they'd be horrified. And so to then start criminalising that is a really scary prospect. And I don't want to live in a world where I'm nervous about what I'm saying to a man, or nervous about a man saying something to me, or he's not going to say something for fear that I might take it the wrong way. What kind of world is that? That's really scary, quite dystopian, that we will be holding back on how we talk to each other and how we live our lives.
Misogyny is yet another hate crime. Should it be?
I don't see why it shouldn't be. I mean, lots of groups are protected under the law, people with disabilities, people of certain racial groups, of certain religions. Ella, you say in the book that classifying misogyny as a hate crime implies that women are inherently unequal. I don't think that's true. I think it just implies that women are more likely to face sex-based oppression than men. In terms of wolf whistling being criminalised, I'd be interested to know how many convictions there have actually been, because I think that, as you say, it's likely that in most of these cases the woman will just brush it off and never report it to the police. But the fact that these laws are in place means that if something could escalate, then it could be classified as a hate crime, which I think it should be.
Wow. Ella, back to you.
I'm very worried about the idea of hate crime. I think that there shouldn't be any hate crime legislation, simply because the idea of hate crime is thought crime. So if you are criminalising a man for wolf whistling, which is, it's a sound, but it's speech, it's not action, what you're doing is you're criminalising the thought, the sexual desire, or whatever it is that's motivating that action. If you're criminalising misogyny, which is a belief, then you are criminalising a thought. And then we get into the dystopian realm of thought crime, which, is extremely worrying. I think people don't kind of realise the consequences of saying, well, okay, so, why not? Most women won't report it, but hey, let's just call it a hate crime. I mean, you have to kind of look at what this says about women, because yes, most women aren't going to call the police, or you'd hope, if someone wolf whistled at them, because most women have, more balls than that, actually. But what this says about women is it does put us in a lesser state than men, because, as Kerry says, it insinuates that we need the state to protect us from not only actions, but thoughts, bad thoughts, sexist thoughts, or whatever you want to classify wolf whistling as. The reality for most women is that when things like this happen, in the very rare instances that they do, and it is very rare, that needs to be stated, is that most women will either ignore it or actually they'll shout back. I think we kind of forget that there is a to and fro between the sexes, which is very natural and which most people can absolutely handle. I get very worried about the idea that it tends to be, and this is what I talk about in the book, it's a touchy subject, it tends to be, on the whole, a certain group of women tends to be middle class feminists and media journalists who say, of course we can be bolshy and of course women can stand up for themselves. But there are these other women out there who can't, who are shy, and so we should have protection for them. And, you know, on behalf of all those shy women out there, I think most of them are rolling their eyes and thinking that this is extremely, extremely patronising. Any kind of involvement on my part, I believe that any involvement from the state into women's private lives, when you walk along the street, that is your private life, is a no-go. I'm absolutely against that.
Clara, what about things like porn? You know, if we're saying we don't want censorship, particular, I mean, Rachel does, she wants it criminalised, which is a bit scary. But what about porn? Is that a step too far?
I'm against censoring porn. I don't think it's necessary to do something like that, especially because it really goes into the private lives of individuals, and if someone's choice is to look at porn, go ahead. But so yeah, I don't get the feminist obsession with criminalising porn, for instance, because it is a private issue, and I think that feminists should concentrate more on battling or combating public issues.
On this, Marissa, let me come to you. Should we be inviting the state into the bedroom?
Absolutely not. We shouldn't be inviting the state to our private lives at all. And it's interesting because the way the feminist movement portrays itself, you know, it's saying that it wants to advance women's freedom, but actually they're not, because when you say that women are vulnerable and they will collapse every time they see a woman in a bikini, or every time they hear a sort of wolf whistle, whatever, they will collapse. Basically what you're trying to say is that we are vulnerable and we are weak, and essentially you're saying we are different from men, and you are basically going back a step to what Ella was saying, you know, to the Victorian times when women were prevented from taking part in public life for the same reasons, because we were seen as more vulnerable, more fragile, and that's for me, that's really worrying.
What about the internet? What about online, you know, abusive tweets? Eleanor?
I think that it's one of those places where it's not the same kind of back and forth that you were talking about between men and women. I think that it can stop people from feeling like they can enter into a new way of communicating in public.
Why can't you respond or ignore these things?
Ella was kind of saying in her book that if women don't like and are too offended by what people are saying, they should just leave. And to me, that is what people will do. They will leave. And I think it would be far better to stop people from being able to say highly racist and misogynistic abuse online.
Who's going to do that? Who do you want to do that?
I think that the same kind of laws which stop you from being able to say things to somebody in the street could be used online.
Wow, heavy policing all round. On the street, on the street, on the net. Ella?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't see a difference between, I mean, you know, people talk about the online world as if it's this like different universe. It is still thought, it is still speech, it's not action. And so I would be completely against any regulation or any censorship of online communication, simply because when women or men or whoever get abuse online, and I've had my fair share, most of the time it makes me laugh more than anything else. I've been called all kinds of terrible things, but I accept that if I want to, especially as I'm a political being, if I want to be out in the world of politics and public life, it's not always going to be rosy, and you shouldn't expect it as an adult to always be plain sailing. The thing you have to think about is how to deal with this. If you want to change the world and you want to be part of a public discussion, then you shouldn't be asking effectively for a safe space, which I think all of this regulation is saying. It's saying that we need to make Twitter or Facebook a safer space for women. And what you're saying there is that women cannot handle communication online in the same way that men do. And let me tell you, people can be pretty nasty to men online as well. It's not exclusive necessarily. Regulation and censorship always passes judgment on who that is intending to protect. So it's not about a kind of airy-fairy thing of making it a nicer place, more accessible for women. It's actually saying that we need to protect little women and fragile women from the potential nasty stuff they'll get online. And I mean, that not only infantilizes us, but completely removes our political agency, because I want to know when someone's talking crap about me online. I mean, sometimes I don't, but most of the time I want to know so that I can either respond to it or, if it's halfway intelligent, or kind of, know the situation. Are we going to pretend that stuff doesn't happen? Are we going to pretend that people don't get nasty to each other? I mean, we don't want a safe space online. That would be kind of really detrimental to any kind of idea of women's liberation.
Let's move on and think about Ella's chapter 2 in the book on feminism and the body. Weight, boobs, periods. Is this gross out feminism? Hannah, what do you think?
With freedom of speech, people speaking about issues such as weight, periods, boobs, why not? There are a lot of people talking about it, which means obviously, I know you refer to it as a trivial issue, but there are many women that are concerned with these things. And the more talk, the better. If people are talking about these things, change can come about, but even if it doesn't, it's better than being silent. With regards to the etiquette, I know you in the book you speak about people writing pussy words or all different things, and your tone is quite disparaging when you speak of that, and you find it quite trivial that they're marching with these signs using crude words, as you put it. But then I do find that your book, the way you write your book, you also use crude slang, some people might think, and how is that different?
Ella?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing about this gross out feminism, which is not a term I coined, it's what a feminist used in an article, is the idea that feminism should be focused on shooting down the idea that bodily functions are gross. That's why they write articles about periods, why they go on protests with bloodstained white jeans, about the tampon tax, why they talk about freeing the nipple. And in relation to how I talk about this in the book, what was really interesting is that the March Against Trump was focused so much on women's bodies. So they had huge pictures of ovaries, and they had pictures of vaginas, and yes, they used words like pussy power and stuff like that. And it was really intrinsically linking a women's political movement to her body. I mean, the most uninteresting thing about a woman politically is her body. It's what's up here that should interest us. And so that kind of bringing women back to a very visceral thing, that everything we think and do is directly linked to our vagina or our womb or our boobs, I think that's completely negative. I mean, you can definitely, it's one of the criticisms that I'll take on board in relation to the book, that I have got a potty mouth. And the thing is, as someone who's not afraid to speak her mind, I actually enjoy talking about stuff like this with my girlfriends. I like talking about, periods or whatever it is. I think most normal human beings do, especially in close relationships. But the problem is with politicizing women's bodies in this very negative way. Gross out feminism is really just an attempt, I think, to focus on the most boring aspects of women, what comes out of us once a month, what's in our pants, what's under our t-shirts, rather than what we think and what we believe. And so, I mean, that's why I'm totally against it.
Ella, you say there's a more serious case for bodily autonomy. Maybe you can tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, the really interesting thing about contemporary feminism is that it very rarely talks about abortion rights. And the reason why I get so annoyed at this kind of gross out feminism obsession with other elements of the body is that, and for example, the tampon tax, is that it's like that. Parliament will debate the tampon tax, and you'll get people getting up and emoting, and Stella Creasy, an MP, kind of waxing lyrical about it. It has taken years and years and years to get Parliament to discuss decriminalising abortion, and recently they did. There's been some kind of positive sounds about that. And this is just such a great example for me about how unserious feminism is. There is more pro-choice feeling, certainly, which is a great thing, but it's a battle that hasn't been won yet, and we shouldn't waste time on trivial rubbish like periods, I think.
Let's move on and consider Ella's chapter on feminism and sex. Do we live in a rape culture? That's the message we're getting from the #MeToo campaign. Obviously, #MeToo went completely viral after Ella had finished her book, and I think the Weinstein hysteria, moral panic, was post when you'd finished written your book. So your book, I have to say, was very much like a crystal ball in what was to come. Rachel, let me come to you. Rape culture.
Yeah, rape culture.
Do we live in one?
I think we do. I think it's a term. I think it's a term that a lot of people misunderstand. It doesn't mean that we live in a culture where everyone thinks that rape is okay or that rape is extremely common, but it definitely is true that rape is more common in our society than some societies in the world. It is true, Gary. It is true. And it's definitely true that there are certain structures, whether that's within law or socially, that make it easier for rapists to get away with their crimes.
Everything from catcalling to jokes. These are all rape culture, Emily, are they?
Well, no, but some people argue that they are, or that they're on a spectrum, which is part of this whole kind of rape culture thing, which I would say is absolutely not true. I mean, rape is a serious crime, which when it happens is awful and is treated as a crime, and people are given, men usually are given long sentences for that and are punished for it. But this idea that kind of catcalling or wolf whistling or jokes or flirting or banter is all kind of building up to this sense of rape culture is, I don't see that at all. I've grown up in the 21st century, been to university, and I just have not experienced that. Women are not faced with a kind of daily threat from rape, serious kind of sexual assault. That's just not the case.
Eleanor, all men, university life, potential predators. Are you scared?
No, I don't think all men are predators, and I think we live in a peaceful society, and that's fantastic, and most people don't commit acts of violence, and most people are not at constant fear of having violence committed against them. But I also think that these kind of sexual assaults like rape aren't prosecuted, and that they should be, and that is where kind of the focus should be. That I think only 6% of reported rapes are prosecuted in the UK, and I think that there should be some work done to work out why that's happening.
Marissa?
I mean, this idea that there is a rape culture is a myth. But I think the problem is that we live in a time where a lot of stats are flowing around. So as Ella mentioned in her book, the NUS study, for example, that talks about how 1 in 4 students suffer from sexual harassment and so on, which actually then you say they conflate all sorts of sexual harassments. So, you know, from a joke to groping, they put it all in the same basket and then say, look, we have a terrible scenario, you know, all these students are being groped or, you know, suffer from all this epidemic, which is myth and is a lie. And this stuff's being propagated. And the more you tell women that there is a rape culture out there, the more damaging it is. Because what you're literally saying here is basically saying, well, look, don't go to the outside world, don't conquer the world because there's this dangerous place. And the more you say it, the more young girls believe it. One of the main problems with today's feminists is that they propagate these lies and create a very suspicious environment and very detrimental towards, the relationship between women and men. That's the problem.
What about Pestminster, and what about powerful men and political men and the casting couch?
I mean, for me, that's a non-story, and quite cringy to see grown-up women that are quite well-educated, middle class, with a lot of money, saying they feel vulnerable because a senior guy, sent them a text message or touched their knee. I mean, they seriously need to grow some balls. That's what I have to say to them. But the problem, I think, we have to see the consequences of this in the long run. And we just saw that, for example, the Labour politician, was accused for sexual harassment. I mean, he didn't even know who accused him, but he took his own life. This witch hunt has consequences, and we already saw some of those. And I'm not comfortable with that at all.
Ella, let's come back to you on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of rape culture is actually extremely disingenuous because it hasn't actually got anything to do with rape on the most part. When people talk about a rape culture, they're not talking about rape. They're talking about things that are rapey, as they describe it. So that can be anything from what we've been talking about previously, a catcall or something like that, right up to groping someone or sexual conduct of a deviant nature, whether that be, like Harvey Weinstein asking someone to watch him shower. The thing about Pestminster, I think, is a really great example of where this quite damaging and scary panic about sexual interaction leads. So we do have a situation now where people are losing their jobs on the basis of being, shall I say, slight pervs. Michael Fallon, the British MP, had to step down from his role as Defence Secretary because there were allegations against him, one of touching someone's knee and one of, I think it was Andrea Leadsom, of telling Andrea Leadsom that he knew where she could put her cold hands. I mean, this is where we're at. We're at a situation where we are sacking men and publicly shaming men and witch hunts, kind of pursuing of a witch hunt on the basis of very low level, stupid, but everyday kind of behaviour. The problem really with rape culture is that I think it completely demeans the seriousness of rape. And we will all agree that rape is a very different thing to any of these kind of behaviours that we're talking about. It's very different to even sexual assault. And by talking about a continuum, by saying that we live in a rape culture, by describing rape as something that can be just put on a scale with every other kind of sexually deviant behaviour, what we're saying really is that, well, rape isn't actually that different. It's not something that we should take seriously in its own right. It's something that can be explained. You know, that if a guy kind of is going to wink at you too much at the bar and think that he can push his luck when he's asking you out on a date, that potentially sometime in the future that means that he might maybe rape someone. I mean, neither is that factually true. It's not the case that rapists have long histories of being overly flirty. It's not that simple. And also what it says is that we don't actually think that rape is really that serious. I mean, and that is terrifying. Pestminster, as Marissa said, is a complete non-issue. And I'm absolutely bored to the back teeth of reading newspaper headlines about the next kind of media journalist who's come out with a revelation of some guy who said to her something a bit rude at the bar. This is really, really kind of, we're seeing contemporary feminism play itself out in a very ugly way, because what it's doing is completely politicising, in a very detrimental way to women, sexual interaction. And it's saying that when people flirt, when people come on, when people try it on, whether that be on the casting couch, in the bar after an interview, or just in the workplace at the Christmas work drinks, that we should be afraid of what they call unwanted sexual conduct. I mean, that's really, really worrying for me.
Do you really think this is a kind of common problem?
The way that I see rape culture is, no, it's not true that every woman is at risk of being raped every time that she goes outside. The majority of rapes are committed by a small number of repeat offenders, and by someone who's known to the victim, not, a stranger who's attacking you in an alleyway. However, what I think rape culture is that in these cases, people still often are getting away with it. So conviction rates for rape are still extremely low, and the majority of rapes, although it's hard to gather statistics on this type of thing, are still not reported. And you talk about the campus sexual assault paranoia in your book. I think how that started was after a number of highly publicised cases, but the perpetrators weren't punished because, they were athletes, boys will be boys, she was passed out so she didn't technically say no. And that, to me, is rape culture, and that's still a problem today.
Ella, let's come to you.
As any lawyer will tell you, rape cases are, one of the most difficult cases, because it often boils down to one person's word against another. And so that is why we have to, much caution has to be kind of practiced in relation to rape cases. Unfortunately, today what you do have is a situation in which women are automatically believed. And that's not to say that there's women all around the world lying about rape cases. I think you'd have to be a very sort of strange person to do that. But what we're doing is we're redefining actually what rape can mean. So in America, in campuses in America, there's a thing called Title IX, which is a setup on campus which actually serves to, encourage women to see situations in which they may have had consensual sex under the influence of alcohol as potential, as rereading back through history to say that they've been raped. So we've got this really kind of dangerous and toxic conversation happening. So rather than actually having a sensible discussion about rape cases and how the police deal with that, what we're doing now is completely railroading justice. What a proper justice system should do is to treat the allegations seriously but equally, which means innocent until proven guilty.
Ella, in her book, explains that this kind of idea that we're fragile, we're, victims, this is what shapes our identity. What do you make of that?
I think it's dangerous to say that women shouldn't allow rape to be part of their identity, because I feel that identity is based upon good experiences and also bad experiences, and you can't pick and choose. Some people are luckier than others and they have more positive, but some people have more negative. And if they want to speak out about their rape and talk about their rape, go on shows, things like that, I think it's good, because people are talking about it. And if people don't talk about it, then it will be continued to not be reported. So I think the more people talk about their rape, the more reports that will come forward. And also, you say about people should try and leave it aside. And of course, it would be great if you are able to move on from such a negative experience in your life and to try not to let it define you. But I think something like that defines a lot of people who have been in that situation. People should be free to talk about it and embrace it, and only positive things can come from that if that's somebody's way of dealing with it, and that shouldn't be brushed under the carpet.
Ella in her book talks about mattress girl and the idea that you're tortured for life and can't get over it. Marissa, what do you think?
Well, this idea that people would want to portray themselves as victim, as something to be celebrated, I find that shocking, because, you know, if you are basically a victim, you are robbed of your agency, so you are disempowered. And this idea, for example, with Me Too, that you go on social media and you basically tell the world all your negative encounters, that's portrayed as being brave, whereas my idea of a brave woman is nothing like that. It's, for example, the dame, you know, the journalist that was on Channel 4 News that said that when a guy tried it on her, she basically stabbed him with a cigarette. Not stabbed him, but, you know, basically
Stubbed out a cigarette
on him. And I thought, that's brave. You know, so this idea that you celebrate all your suffering, I find that really backward, because you should be celebrating your achievements, not your suffering.
The mattress girl was a woman called Emma Solkowitz, who was a student at Columbia University in New York, which a few years ago alleged rape against someone who she was in a relationship for a short period of time. And he was acquitted. And as a protest against this, she decided to make an art project, which was called Carry That Weight. And what she did was she carried a mattress with her throughout the rest of her university career to all of her lessons and carried it across campus as what she said was a physical sign of the fact that she had been raped, and she was protesting the fact that this man had not been jailed for what had happened to her, and also that he hadn't been kicked off campus. So this is exactly boils down to what I'm trying to get at in my criticism of focusing and fetishizing over the idea of rape victims. You know, I think people often think that I sound very unsympathetic when I'm talking about this, but actually what I'm saying when I'm saying that we shouldn't kind of make women sort of focus on the fact of the negative experiences, it's not to say that they shouldn't talk about it. I mean, we should never we don't want to go back to kind of people hushing women when they've had negative experiences. I don't think anyone is arguing for that. But what you do when you say that rape or some kind of sexual assault or some negative thing that's happened to you becomes intrinsic to your identity, I think what we're in danger of saying there is it's almost scarlet letter-like. It's like you become a tainted woman. This thing that happened to you, that this person did to you and robbed you of your agency and took away your freedom and victimized you and made you, you completely helpless in relation sometimes to rape cases. You forever are somebody who is living under the consequence of something that someone else did to you. So you're not defining yourself as Ella Whelan who does and says things, but I'm defined as Ella Whelan who, when I was 14, had someone do something like that to me. But as best we can, we should be telling women especially, that man that did that to you has got nothing to do with you, and to stop him from having any more control over your life, you demand that you no longer be seen as a victim, that you encourage yourself to get beyond that. It's like a really controversial thing today to say that we should get beyond stuff. I mean, I don't know why. Why would we want to live continuously reminding ourselves of the terrible thing that happened to us? In celebrating victim culture, in the way that I think a lot of the discussion about rape is happening, it's not saying that it's not being sympathetic to rape victims. It's actually saying that you have to, like the mattress girl, carry that negative experience with you, wear it almost like a badge all the time, and have it define all the rest of your life. That is kind of that is the thing of the tainted woman. That is like the scarlet letter, and I think that is so detrimental to any kind of celebration of women's strength.
Let's move on and think about the world of work, which you deal with in your last but one chapter on feminism at work. We have equality under the law, yeah, you know, we're all equal. We can do pretty much any job now, but is there a problem of a sexist culture in the world of work? Rachel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there definitely is, and I think one of the problems that I've had with this book actually is blaming feminism for a lot of things that were already problems before feminism came along. So like it even goes back to Mattress Girl. Feminism didn't tell Emma Solkowitz that she had to feel deeply affected by her rape and carry a mattress around. No, she came up with that idea by herself as an autonomous woman, and feminism said, okay, we support that. She's even said in later interviews that she wasn't doing it as an explicitly feminist act. Where that leads to in the world of work, the overwhelming evidence is that women are at a disadvantage in the world of work because they're passed over for promotions more often, seen as less capable than men, even when they perform to the same level, less likely to be accepted for mentor positions or even just to be hired in the first place. When they are hired, they're offered lower salaries. So I think it's much more likely that these things are responsible for women feeling at a disadvantage in the world of work rather than feminism is, when actually feminism is there to support women who have been feeling these things for hundreds of years.
Okay, well, I'd be interested to know what Ella thinks of Rachel's perception of things. But what about this 50-50 campaign?
I find this quotas idea actually very patronising, because what you're basically saying is that you'd select me not because of my ideas or my worth, but because of my gender. That is hugely patronising. It's almost like I need a leg up to get there, and I don't. You know, we live in a time where what I want is just equal opportunity, and that's what we have. We achieved that already.
Ella?
It is illegal to discriminate on the basis of sex in the workplace. That's, that is a fact. And actually, when you look at the pay for like work between men and women, there is no difference. And it isn't true that women are being less put up for promotion. We do not have a sexist culture in the workplace, certainly in the UK. That just is not the case. It's not the lived experience of women. And on the basis of politics, this is where it gets really interesting, because you cannot tell me one MP, one female MP in Parliament, who I think is adequately arguing for anything beneficial to women at the moment. The female leaders we have has been less than satisfactory. Blair's Babes in the 90s, which was when Tony Blair brought in a lot of women into the Labour Party, not one of those female MPs has ever said anything worthwhile in relation to women's liberation in Parliament. Take the example of abortion rights, which we were talking about previously. Women are not talking about that in Parliament. It's only one MP, Diane Mundy, who's talking about that. So the idea that you bring more women into politics and then it gets better for women is A, not proven, it just doesn't happen, and B, it completely misunderstands what we mean by what is political worth, because simply being a woman doesn't change your brain. It doesn't make you more want to have, a certain kind of politics. What matters is what you actually think in the world. The thing that Marissa's pointed out about the patronising element of this is really crucial, because if we are saying that we're comfortable in a world which works on quotas, which says that it doesn't matter how crap you are at your job, if you're a woman, we need a woman, and so we're going to get you in on a kind of tokenistic basis, I think what that really does is reinforces old stereotypes. It's actually quite reactionary, because it's saying that the only worth a woman has is in what's in her, pants or her gender, rather than what's in her head. When a kind of really great example of this is the Labour election a few years ago. 3 women stood for Parliament, and they did it on the basis of a kinder, gentler politics. And there was a discussion about how having more women in leadership positions would mean that we had less bickering in PMQs, that there was kind of less boorish in the Houses of Parliament, that it would be politer and nicer. And I mean, that is an old stereotype. That is a sexist stereotype, that women are kind of going to bring a more polite kind of situation to politics. I want us to just get over this gender pay gap thing, because I think it's something that really stilts any kind of conversation, interesting conversation about work, of which there are some conversations to be had. For example, when women come back to work after having children, there is still some issues there in relation to childcare. That's a conversation that we could have, a difficult one that we could have, that's not as clean cut as the sexist issue. I get so annoyed by people continuously banging on about the gender pay gap when A, it doesn't exist, and B, the solution that you would have quotas and leg ups, as Marissa said, completely undermines any kind of women's worth in the workplace.
Okay, well, let's look at Ella's conclusion. Has feminism, had its day? Emily, can I come to you first of all?
Well, I think the feminism that we've sort of been discussing today should be over, at least. I'm not sure it is, but it should be. But the kind of modern idea of trying to protect women and keep women away from public life and kind of box them off and say you're special and you're different and we're going to treat you differently and you should be protected from certain ideas, I would say absolutely let's have an end to that, let's be rid of that. I think actually most women out there don't kind of see their lives as being in accordance with that at all.
Let's do a little poll. Who here sees himself as a feminist? Okay, well that's interesting. Okay, you're in the minority. That might not be true in the university world, might be very true of the rest of the real world. But we'll let Ella have the final say on this.
Yeah, so it was a controversial subheading to the book, Fun, Freedom and an End to Feminism. And what I really meant by it is that feminism today, contemporary feminism, as it stands, offers nothing positive for women. In my view, and I think in most women's view, outside of the world of media journalism and perhaps the university, most women would balk at the idea that they needed to be protected by the state or encouraged to celebrate their victim status or have their, position as a woman prioritised over their position as a thinking political being. There is nothing in today's contemporary feminism that deals head on with some of the issues we've talked about, like childcare, like abortion rights. Feminism today is very much focused on women's bodies, women's, sexual experiences in relation to problematising relations between men and women. It does nothing beneficial. And I really think what the most kind of thing that irks me about it is that it is a feminism for a tiny group of women. It is a feminism that is propagated by middle-class women, polite society, who have either no experience of what most women out there in the world are thinking, and are also kind of patronising the rest of us out there who are able to stand on our own 2 feet and deal with the world and politics as it comes to us. If we want to get serious about talking about the things that women still face, about looking at how we can make the world better, because, while we've got it very good and life is great for women, it can always get better. It can always get better for everyone. That's something that WORLDwrite and Spiked very much believe in. Things can always be better and we want more. And you're never going to successfully make the argument for plenty, like Sylvia Pankhurst made, and for more from society, if you position women as less than men, as more fragile, and as, completely kind of victimised and weak. I think this is what feminism does. And I, as someone who believes that women are strong and capable and ugly enough to deal with the world, are completely insulted by it.
Okay, well, great note to end on. And first of all, huge thank you to Ella for a brilliant discussion on her book, which we've all enjoyed. We'd love to hear what you think, and also what you think if you've read or when you read. I believe it's available on Amazon, Ella's book. If you'd like to be part of a Books and Buns show, if you've got a great book you think we ought to be discussing and you think you can talk about it as eloquently as Ella, or if you'd just like to be a discussant like our terrific volunteers who've been so brilliant today, email us.